they call humans. Silent war gods, pray they never awaken. The Galactic Council. Chambers had never been so quiet. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species, his forearms trembling slightly as he clutched the datapad containing humanity's first official response to the Council's demands. "Honored delegates," Zethkar began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans have replied to our ultimatum regarding the disputed territories in the Kepler sector." The silence stretched longer. Even the usually chattering Pixari delegates had gone completely still, their crystalline bodies no longer chiming with nervous energy. Everyone knew what this moment meant. For the first time in 300 years, someone had dared to challenge the Galactic Council's authority directly. Fleet Admiral Crocs of the Hegemony Navy leaned forward, his massive bulk causing his chair to groan. "Well, what do these primitives say?" Zethkar's throat sac inflated nervously. "They said, and I quote directly from their transmission, no." The word hung in the air like a poison cloud. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. How dare these newcomers, these barely spacefaring mammals, refuse the Council's generous offer to peacefully relocate from the systems they had begun colonizing? High Chancellor Vexari raised one of her 6 hands, and the chamber fell silent again. Her species, the Etherians, had been among the founding members of the Council, and their word carried weight that could move fleets. "Perhaps," she said, her voice like silk over steel, "these humans simply do not understand the consequences of their defiance. How many ships do they possess, Admiral Crocs?" The Admiral consulted his tactical display. "According to our intelligence, approximately 2,000 vessels of various classifications. Most appear to be converted civilian craft. Their largest ships are roughly equivalent to our light cruisers." Scattered laughter rippled through the chamber. The Council Navy maintained over 50,000 warships, each one a marvel of engineering that had taken centuries to perfect. These humans had been in space for less than 200 years. They were children playing with fire. "And their military doctrine?" Chancellor Vexari continued. "Primitive," Crocs replied dismissively. "They rely heavily on kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. No energy shields, no quantum torpedoes, no dimensional warfare capabilities. In short, they fight like our ancestors did a millennium ago." More laughter, though it carried a nervous edge. There was something unsettling about the human response. Not just the simple no, but the way it had been delivered. No threats, no bluster, no attempts at negotiation. Just a single word that somehow felt heavier than the combined mass of their entire fleet. "There is something else," Zethkar said reluctantly. "The humans included a secondary message. They said we should ask the Gorthek about them." The chamber erupted into chaos. The Gorthek Imperium had been one of the Council's most aggressive expansion forces until 50 years ago, when they had simply stopped. Their borders had remained static, their fleets recalled to defensive positions. When questioned, Gorthek representatives had always changed the subject, claiming their expansion pause was for internal political reasons. Chancellor Vexari's eyes narrowed to slits. "Admiral, locate the nearest Gorthek representative immediately." Within the hour, High War Master Thurok of the Gorthek was brought before the emergency session. The massive reptilian warrior looked distinctly uncomfortable as he approached the speaker's platform, his usually pristine ceremonial armor somehow seeming less impressive than usual. "War Master Thurok," the Chancellor began, "what can you tell us about these humans?" Thurok's predatory eyes darted around the chamber, clearly looking for an escape route that didn't exist. "Honored Chancellor, that is, the Gorthek Empire has had limited contact with the human species." "Limited contact?" Admiral Crox's voice boomed across the chamber. Our intelligence shows that your expansion stopped exactly when humans entered the galactic stage. Explain this coincidence. The War Master's massive claws scratched nervously against his armor plating. Perhaps it would be better if I showed you instead of telling you. With shaking hands, Thurok activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The image showed a small moon orbiting a gas giant in what appeared to be empty space. The moon's surface was scarred and blackened, but otherwise unremarkable. "This is Kalar 7, Thurok said, his voice growing quieter with each word. It was one of our forward military bases, home to nearly 1 million Gorthek soldiers and support staff. The base was considered impregnable, protected by orbital defense platforms and a fleet of 300 warships. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. 51 years ago, a single human ship approached this system. It was not a warship by any definition we understood. According to our sensors, it appeared to be a converted asteroid mining vessel, perhaps 200 meters long, with a crew of fewer than 50 individuals. The delegates leaned forward, transfixed, despite themselves. The human ship broadcast a simple message. Thurok continued. They claimed we had attacked one of their colonies without provocation, killing 18,000 civilians. They demanded we withdraw from the system and provide compensation for the families of the dead. And, Chancellor Vexari prompted, we refused, of course. The base commander, War Captain Vexilok, was insulted by the audacity of these mammals. He ordered the orbital platforms to destroy the human ship. The image shifted, showing the massive defensive installations surrounding the moon, energy cannons the size of city blocks, missile batteries that could level continents, shield generators that could withstand direct stellar bombardment. "What happened next?" Admiral Crox asked, though something in his voice suggested he didn't really want to know. Thurok's claws scraped against the metal podium. Nothing. For exactly 72 hours, nothing happened. The human ship simply waited. It didn't move, didn't respond to further communications, didn't take any action whatsoever. Our sensors showed it was completely powered down except for basic life support. Then, at exactly 72 hours and 0 minutes after our refusal, every Gorthek in the system began to die. The chamber erupted in gasps and horrified whispers. Several delegates activated their personal shields or called for their security details. Not all at once, Thurok clarified, his voice now a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. That would have been merciful. Instead, they died in a very specific pattern. First, everyone who had voted to refuse the human demands. Then everyone who had fired on human ships or colonies. Then everyone who had given orders that led to human deaths. Then everyone who had supported those orders. He paused again, his massive frame visibly trembling. The humans had done something to our communication networks, our computers, our very databases. Every action, every decision, every vote that had led to their people's deaths was traced back through our own records with perfect accuracy. And those responsible died. How? Chancellor Vexari's voice was steady, but her hands were gripping her chair's armrests so tightly that the metal began to deform. We never found out. No poison was detected, no weapons discharged, no signs of violence at all. They simply stopped. One by one, over the course of 6 days, 18,037 Gorthek soldiers and civilians died, the exact number of humans who had been killed in our initial attack. The holographic display shifted again, showing the interior of what appeared to be a command center. Bodies lay slumped over consoles, sprawled on floors, collapsed in chairs, all of them perfectly preserved, showing no signs of injury or struggle. On the 7th day, the human ship powered up again and broadcast another message. They thanked us for our cooperation in providing justice for their dead and informed us that the matter was now closed. They offered medical assistance to the survivors and provided star charts for the safest routes away from human space. Thurok's voice broke slightly. They were polite about it, professional, as if they had just completed a routine administrative task. The chamber remained silent for long minutes. Finally, Admiral Crox found his voice. "What did your empire do?" "What could we do?" Thurok spread his 4 arms in a gesture of helplessness. "We investigated every possible explanation. Biological weapons, nanomachines, quantum manipulation, dimensional warfare, psychic attacks, nothing. Our greatest scientists studied the bodies for years and found absolutely no cause of death. They had simply decided to stop living. The survivors reported no unusual sensations, no pain, no awareness that anything was happening until their colleagues began collapsing around them. Those marked for death didn't even know they were dying until the moment their hearts stopped beating." Chancellor Vexari leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through the implications. "And your empire's response?" "Immediate withdrawal from all systems within 100 light-years of human space," Thurok replied without hesitation. "All aggressive expansion ceased. Our border fortifications were converted to defensive-only configurations. And we issued standing orders that no Gorthek ship or citizen was ever to take hostile action against a human being under any circumstances." The War Master looked up at the assembled delegates, his predatory features somehow managing to convey profound sadness. That was 51 years ago. In all that time, we have had no further contact with the humans. They kept their word. The matter was closed, and they left us alone. But we learned something else in the years that followed. The humans call it their silent war. It's not a conflict in any sense we would recognize. It's a principle, a philosophy that governs how they interact with the galaxy. He activated another display, this one showing what appeared to be a human text document. The translation software struggled with some of the concepts, but the main points were clear enough. According to captured human databases, their silent war doctrine states that humans prefer peaceful coexistence, but will respond to aggression with what they call proportional inevitability. They don't threaten, they don't bluster, they don't engage in the political theater that dominates galactic diplomacy. They simply inform you of consequences, and then, if necessary, implement those consequences with absolute precision. The document goes on to explain that humans view war itself as a failure of imagination. They consider it far more elegant to simply remove those who choose violence while leaving everyone else completely unharmed. They call it surgical justice. Several delegates began activating their communication devices, no doubt sending urgent messages to their home governments. The implications were staggering. If the humans could selectively kill anyone, anywhere, with no detectable method and no way to prevent or defend against it, then traditional military thinking was not just obsolete, but potentially suicidal. "There's more," Thurok said reluctantly. "Over the years, we've monitored their communications and learned about their history. What they did to us was not unique. They have been practicing this form of warfare for thousands of years, long before they reached the stars." "Among themselves?" Admiral Crox asked. "Initially, yes, but as they developed better technology and more sophisticated methods, they began using it to resolve conflicts in ways that minimized overall suffering. Dictators would simply die in their sleep. War criminals would quietly pass away. Corrupt officials would experience sudden and inexplicable heart failure. The patterns were always the same. No violence, no collateral damage, no innocent casualties. Just the precise removal of those who chose to cause harm to others. They call it editing reality for moral clarity." The chamber fell silent again as the delegates absorbed this information. Finally, a small, crystalline delegate from the Pixari Collective spoke up, her voice chiming like wind bells. If they possess such power, why haven't they conquered the galaxy? Thurok's expression grew even more somber. That may be the most terrifying thing about them. According to their own historical records, they consider conquest to be a form of slavery. They believe that forcing others to live under their rule is morally identical to murder because it kills the possibility of free choice. So they don't conquer. They don't expand aggressively. They don't even defend themselves in ways we would recognize. They simply exist. And if you try to harm them or their people, you stop existing. Cleanly, quietly, with no fuss or drama. He looked up at Chancellor Vexari with something that might have been respect or terror. They call themselves the Silent War Gods now, though they seem embarrassed by the title. Apparently, it started as a joke among their younger generation and somehow became official. They prefer to think of themselves as cosmic janitors, cleaning up messes that threaten the peace. The Chancellor stood slowly, her mind still reeling from everything she had heard. And what would you recommend, War Master Thurok, given our current situation? The massive reptilian warrior looked around the chamber one final time, his gaze lingering on each delegate as if memorizing their faces. I would recommend, he said carefully, that you draft a very polite message explaining that there has been a misunderstanding about the Kepler sector. Perhaps suggest that the Council would be honored to recognize human sovereignty over those systems in exchange for their friendship and cooperation. And if they refuse? Thurok's laugh was bitter and filled with genuine fear. Honored Chancellor, I don't think you understand. The humans aren't threatening us. They're not posturing for political advantage. They simply said no because they have no intention of leaving those worlds. The question isn't what happens if they refuse our demands. The question is, what happens when they realize we sent a battle fleet to enforce our ultimatum despite their clear answer? As if summoned by his words, an aide rushed into the chamber and whispered urgently into Admiral Crox's ear. The Admiral's complexion went from its usual deep purple to an alarming shade of gray. "What is it?" Chancellor Vexari demanded. Admiral Crox's voice was hollow. "Our task force in the Kepler sector has gone silent. All 17 ships, including the flagship Dominator. Last communication was 12 hours ago." "Destroyed?" someone called out. "Unknown. There's no debris, no energy signatures, no signs of battle. They're simply gone." The chamber erupted into chaos once more, but Thurok's voice somehow cut through the noise like a blade. "Not gone," he said with absolute certainty. "Edited." The hum captain, Sarah Chen, stood on the observation deck of the human vessel, Quiet Thunder, watching the stars wheel slowly past as her ship maintained its patrol route through the outer edges of the Kepler sector. To any external observer, her ship appeared to be nothing more than a converted cargo hauler, perhaps 200 meters long and showing the wear patterns of decades in space. They would be wrong on every count. Sarah sipped her coffee and reviewed the morning reports on her tablet. 3 more Council fleets had been relocated overnight, their crews finding themselves in perfectly functional ships, suddenly orbiting a barren system roughly 50,000 light-years from Earth. No weapons had been fired, no lives lost, no dramatic battles fought. The ships simply stopped being where they were and started being somewhere else instead. The humans called it aggressive relocation therapy. The media had started using the more dramatic term dimensional banishment, but Sarah preferred the clinical accuracy of the official designation. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the diplomatic vessel Honest Broker. Ambassador Williams requests permission to come aboard." Sarah nodded. "Grant permission and prepare conference room Alpha. Full formal protocols." 20 minutes later, Ambassador David Williams materialized on the transport pad, his tall frame somehow managing to look both diplomatic and dangerous. Sarah had known David for 15 years, ever since they had served together on the first contact mission to the Arcturus Republic. Back then, he had been a junior xenocultural specialist. Now he was humanity's chief diplomatic representative to the Galactic Council, and the man responsible for trying to end this conflict before it escalated beyond anyone's ability to control. "Sarah," David said with a weary smile, "how are you holding up?" "Same as always," she replied, leading him toward the conference room. "Ready for anything, hoping for nothing. What's the situation with the council?" David's smile faded. "Complicated. They're starting to panic, which makes them dangerous. Intelligence indicates they're considering what they call the nuclear option." Sarah paused mid-step, which is complete sterilization of human space. They're talking about using stellar manipulation weapons to trigger supernovas in our major systems. The coffee cup in Sarah's hand began to crack under the pressure of her grip. She forced herself to relax and carefully set it down on a nearby console. "Time frame? Unknown. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how quickly their remaining fleets can be repositioned and how long it takes them to overcome their own moral objections to xenocide." They entered the conference room, a simple space dominated by a large holographic display currently showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red dots marked council fleet positions. Blue dots represented human ships and installations, and green dots showed the locations where various council forces had been relocated. Sarah studied the pattern for a moment, then looked up at David. "Recommendations?" "Officially, continue current operations. Make it clear that we're not going anywhere and that attempts to force us will be met with proportional response." "And unofficially?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star map with the expression of a man trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Unofficially, I think we need to show them something that will make them reconsider the wisdom of escalation." "Such as?" "The archive." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The archive was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a repository of knowledge and capabilities that even most humans didn't know existed. It contained the complete records of the Silent War, including techniques and weapons that hadn't been used for over a century because they were considered too dangerous. "David, you know the rules. Archive access requires unanimous approval from the Council of Nine, and that only happens when humanity faces an existential threat," David finished. "Sarah, they're talking about sterilizing our entire species. If that doesn't qualify, nothing ever will." She activated her personal communicator and sent an encrypted message to Earth. The response came back within minutes. "Archive access approved for Ambassador Williams, Level 7 clearance, all protocols waived due to emergency circumstances." Sarah sealed the conference room and activated the maximum security protocols. Even on a ship designed for the Silent War, there were secrets that required special handling. The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be an ordinary human man sitting in a comfortable chair. He was perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair and tired eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Ambassador Williams, Captain Chen," the figure said. "I am Archive Control 7. I understand you need historical context for the current situation." David leaned forward. "Control 7, the Galactic Council is considering extinction-level force against human space. We need to know if we have response options that might convince them to reconsider." "Understood. Accessing relevant files now." The display shifted again, showing what appeared to be Earth as seen from space, but something was wrong. The continents were in the wrong positions. The colors were slightly off, and there were structures visible from orbit that shouldn't have been possible with current technology. This is Earth as it existed approximately 1,500 years ago, Control 7 explained, during what your historians call the Third Global War, but which was actually the first implementation of silent war protocols on a planetary scale. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She had studied the historical records, but they had always been sanitized, academic. Seeing it like this, rendered in perfect holographic detail, was something else entirely. The conflict began when the African Continental Alliance developed stellar manipulation technology and threatened to trigger a solar flare that would sterilize the Northern Hemisphere unless their territorial demands were met. The image shifted, showing massive installations on the lunar surface and in Earth's orbit. In response, the Silent War Council authorized Implementation Protocol 7, Complete Social Restructuring. Over the course of 72 hours, every individual who had supported the development or deployment of the stellar weapon simply ceased to exist. Not died, ceased. Their atoms were rearranged into constituent elements and redistributed harmlessly into the atmosphere. David's face had gone pale. How many people? Approximately 47 million individuals across the entire planet. The process was completely selective. Family members living in the same house were unaffected if they had not been involved in the decision-making process. In some cases, single neurons in individual brains were edited to remove specific memories while leaving the person otherwise completely intact. The display showed city streets where people simply faded away like morning mist, leaving behind only faint outlines on the pavement. No screaming, no panic, no violence. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. The remaining population was provided with complete documentation of what had occurred and why. They were given a choice: abandon stellar manipulation technology permanently, or face complete species cessation. They chose to abandon the technology? Sarah asked. They chose to abandon much more than that. The shock of realizing that their society had developed beyond the ability to wage traditional war led to a complete restructuring of human civilization. The Silent War Council was established as a permanent institution, and humanity committed itself to never again developing weapons capable of threatening entire worlds. David stared at the images with a mixture of fascination and horror. Until now. Correct. The Galactic Council's threat to sterilize human space represents the first time in over a millennium that humanity has faced extinction-level force from an external source. As such, dormant protocols are now active. The display shifted once more, showing what appeared to be empty space, but with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. These are the quiet ships, Control 7 continued. 18 vessels constructed over the past 50 years and positioned at strategic points throughout Galactic Council space. They have been waiting in dimensional shadow, invisible and undetectable by any known technology. Sarah realized she was holding her breath. What do they do? Each ship is capable of implementing Protocol 7 across an entire star system. Complete social restructuring, selective existence editing, or if necessary, controlled stellar manipulation to remove threats without harming innocent populations. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just been defending itself, it had been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. How long have you known this would happen? David asked. Probability calculations indicated a 67% chance of this conflict arising within 50 years of first contact with the Galactic Council. Humanity's approach to warfare is so fundamentally different from galactic norms that misunderstanding was virtually inevitable. Control 7's expression grew more serious. Ambassador Williams, you should know that the Council of Nine has already voted on response protocols. If the Galactic Council proceeds with stellar sterilization, humanity will implement what we call the gentle apocalypse, which is complete cessation of the Galactic Council as a political entity. Every individual who voted for or supported species-level genocide will simply cease to exist. The process will propagate backward through their decision-making chains until the entire power structure responsible for the decision has been edited out of reality. David felt sick. How many? Current estimates suggest approximately 2 billion individuals across 47 species. However, the process would be carefully controlled to ensure that species survival is not threatened. Leadership structures would be removed, but populations would remain intact. And after that, humanity would establish what we call a quiet hegemony. Not conquest in any traditional sense, but a monitoring system to ensure that no species ever again develops the capability to threaten others with extinction. We would become the galaxy's permanent peacekeepers, whether others want us to or not. Sarah finally found her voice. And if they agree to negotiate? Then none of this happens. The quiet ships return to dimensional shadow, the archive protocols remain dormant, and humanity continues to prefer peaceful coexistence. But the choice must be made within the next 72 hours. The holographic figure looked directly at David. Ambassador, your next communication with the Galactic Council will determine the future of galactic civilization. I suggest you choose your words carefully. After Control 7's image faded, Sarah and David sat in silence for long minutes. Finally, David activated his communication system and began composing a message to the Galactic Council. To the honored members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Humanity has become aware of discussions regarding the sterilization of human space. We find these discussions deeply concerning, as they represent the first time in our recorded history that an external entity has threatened our species with extinction. He paused, choosing his next words with infinite care. In the interest of peaceful resolution, we are prepared to offer a final opportunity for negotiation. We invite a delegation of council representatives to meet with human diplomatic authorities at a neutral location to discuss terms for coexistence. Another pause. However, we feel obligated to point out that humanity has spent the past 50 years preparing for exactly this scenario. We have developed response capabilities that we sincerely hope will never need to be implemented. The choice between negotiation and escalation rests entirely with the Galactic Council. He looked at Sarah, who nodded grimly. We will await your response for exactly 72 hours, after which we will assume that diplomatic solutions are no longer possible and will act accordingly to protect our species. We hope wisdom will prevail. David closed the communication and leaned back, and Chancellor Vexari stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Council, her 6 hands trembling as she held the human ambassador's final message. Around her, representatives from 47 species argued in dozens of languages, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and rage that filled the vast chamber. 67 hours had passed since humanity's ultimatum. 5 hours remained. "Order!" she called, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We must reach a decision." Admiral Crox rose from his position, his massive frame casting shadows across the speaker's platform. "The choice is simple, Chancellor. We bow to these mammals and accept their dominance, or we show them that the Galactic Council will not be intimidated." Intimidated? The crystalline voice of Delegate Shiara from the Pixari Collective rang like breaking glass. "Admiral, have you forgotten what happened to the Gorthek? To our own fleets?" "Tricks!" Crox roared. "Illusions and sleight of hand. No species can simply make ships disappear. When our stellar manipulation weapons reduce their worlds to cosmic dust, we'll see how powerful their editing abilities really are." A new voice spoke from the back of the chamber, quiet but somehow audible to everyone present. "You really don't understand what you're facing, do you?" All heads turned to see a human figure standing in what had been an empty observation gallery. The woman was small and unremarkable, perhaps 40 years old. wearing a simple gray uniform with no visible insignia. She had not been there moments before, and no alarms had sounded to indicate a security breach. "I am Commander Elena Vasquez," she said, walking down the steps toward the main floor as security forces scrambled to intercept her. "I represent the Human Council of 9. The guards who reached her first simply stopped moving, standing frozen like statues with their weapons half drawn. Not paralyzed, not stunned, simply choosing to stand perfectly still with expressions of mild confusion. "How did you—" Chancellor Vexari began. "The same way we've been doing everything else," Elena replied calmly. "By understanding that reality is more flexible than most species believe, and by being very, very good at editing it when necessary." She reached the center of the chamber and looked around at the assembled delegates with an expression of profound sadness. "I'm here to deliver a final message from my government, and to witness your decision. After which, I will implement whatever protocols you make necessary." Admiral Crocs drew his sidearm and aimed it directly at Elena's head. "I've heard enough of human arrogance. One plasma bolt will end this farce." Elena looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Admiral, that weapon contains approximately 47 components. If you pull the trigger, I will edit exactly one of them out of existence. A small focusing crystal, roughly 2 millimeters in diameter. The resulting plasma discharge will fill this chamber and kill everyone except me." "You're bluffing. The Gorthek thought so too. Would you like me to show you what happened to War Captain Vexalok?" She gestured, and suddenly another figure stood beside her. It was massive, reptilian, wearing the ornate armor of a high-ranking Gorthek officer. But something was terribly wrong with it. The figure moved with perfect precision, but showed no signs of consciousness, its eyes empty and unfocused. "War Captain Vexalok chose to fire on a human vessel," Elena explained conversationally. "So we edited his capacity for independent thought. He is now a perfect soldier, capable of following any order with absolute precision, but incapable of making decisions that might harm innocent beings." She looked around the chamber again. "He's actually quite happy this way. No moral dilemmas, no difficult choices, no weight of command. We've found that most aggressive personalities are much more content once their capacity for causing harm has been removed." The war captain's head turned toward Admiral Crocs with mechanical precision. "Admiral Crocs," it said in a voice devoid of emotion, "you are planning to commit genocide. This action will cause unnecessary suffering. Please reconsider your position." Crocs's weapon wavered slightly. "What have you done to him?" "We edited him into the person he always claimed to be," Elena replied. "A protector of the innocent, a defender of justice, a warrior for peace. The only difference is that now, those aren't just words he uses to justify violence. They're the only thoughts he's capable of having." She turned to address the full assembly. "This is what humanity offers the galaxy. Not conquest, not submission, but optimization. We can edit out the parts of individuals and societies that cause unnecessary suffering while leaving everything else intact." Chancellor Vexari found her voice. "You're talking about mind control." "No, I'm talking about evolution. Every species reaches a point where their natural development is no longer sufficient to handle the power they've accumulated. You've developed weapons capable of sterilizing star systems, but you still make decisions based on territorial instincts evolved for fighting over water holes." Elena gestured again, and the holographic display showed scenes from across Council space. Fleets moving into position around human worlds, massive stellar manipulation devices being prepared for deployment, billions of beings preparing for a war that would reshape galactic civilization. In approximately 4 hours and 37 minutes, unless you choose otherwise, every individual responsible for this deployment will cease to exist. not as punishment, but as prevention. We will edit out the parts of your civilization that are capable of genocide while leaving everything else untouched. And then? Vexari asked. And then you'll rebuild. Better, kinder, more focused on creation than destruction. Your children will look back on this moment as the day their species truly began to mature. A new voice spoke from the hegemony delegation. What about our freedom to choose? Elena's expression grew even sadder. You've already chosen. You chose to develop extinction-level weapons. You chose to point them at civilian populations. You chose to threaten an entire species with annihilation. The only choice remaining is whether we implement our response selectively, editing only those directly responsible, or whether we need to implement broader social restructuring. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Finally, a delegate from the Etherian collective stood up. What are your terms for negotiation? Complete abandonment of stellar manipulation weapons. Restructuring of the Galactic Council to include human representation. Establishment of joint peacekeeping protocols to prevent future conflicts. And formal recognition that threatening species-level extinction is an act of war that will be met with immediate and total response. Admiral Crox stepped forward, his weapon still trained on Elena. And if we refuse? Elena looked at him with infinite patience. Then in 4 hours and 36 minutes you will choose to be somewhere else, along with everyone else who supported this deployment, permanently. I'm not afraid to die. Admiral, you're not going to die. You're going to cease. Every decision you've ever made that led to this moment will be undone. Every word you've spoken in support of genocide will be unspoken. Every thought you've had about harming humans will be unthought. She paused, letting the implications sink in. From the perspective of everyone else in the galaxy, you will never have existed. Your family will remember someone else entirely, someone who made better choices. Your subordinates will remember taking orders from officers who chose differently. Your entire timeline will be edited to remove the parts that led to this moment. The Admiral's weapon began to shake. That's impossible. So was making our fleets disappear. So was selectively killing Gorthek soldiers with no detectable cause. So was entering this chamber without triggering your security systems. Elena's voice remained perfectly calm. Admiral, humanity has spent the last 1,500 years learning to edit reality. We've become very good at it. She looked around the chamber one final time. I'm going to leave now. You have 4 hours and 34 minutes to make your choice. If you choose negotiation, send a message to the coordinates I'm providing. If you choose war... Elena paused at the chamber entrance. Well, in that case, you won't be choosing anything ever again. But I promise you'll be much happier people afterward. She walked through the doorway and simply wasn't there anymore, leaving only empty air where she had been standing. The chamber erupted into chaos once more, but this time the tone was different. Fear had replaced anger, and desperate calculation had replaced bluster. Chancellor Vexari called for order again, her voice hoarse with strain. We need a vote. All in favor of opening negotiations? Hands began to rise around the chamber. Slowly at first, then more rapidly, as delegates realized that their colleagues were choosing survival over pride. The final count was unanimous. Within the hour, a message was sent to human space requesting immediate negotiation. The response came back in minutes. Ambassador Williams would meet with a council delegation at the neutral station of Kepler Prime in 72 hours. The stellar manipulation weapons were powered down and withdrawn. The fleets were recalled to defensive positions, and across the galaxy, billions of beings began to realize that they were living in a universe where the old rules no longer applied. 3 months later, Ambassador David Williams stood in the newly constructed council chambers on Kepler Prime, watching as the first integrated session of the Galactic Council came to order. Humans now held 12 seats out of 60, with veto power over any decision involving military force. The new council's first act was to establish the Department of Peaceful Resolution, a joint human-alien organization responsible for mediating conflicts before they could escalate to violence. Their second act was to formally recognize the Silent War Protocols as a legitimate form of galactic peacekeeping. Their third act was to issue a formal apology to humanity for threatening genocide. Admiral Crocs, who had undergone voluntary personality optimization after the crisis, now served as head of the new Conflict Prevention Division. He spent his days developing strategies for resolving disputes through negotiation and compromise, and seemed genuinely happy with his new role. War Captain Vexalock had requested to remain in his edited state, claiming that he had never been more at peace with himself and his purpose in life. The stellar manipulation weapons were dismantled under human supervision, their technology archived in case of future threats from outside the galaxy. And in the depths of space, the quiet ships returned to their dimensional shadows, waiting patiently for the next time they might be needed. The galaxy had learned to live with the Silent War gods, and the Silent War gods had kept their promise: peace, achieved through the simple expedient of making violence impossible for those who chose it. The universe, as it turned out, was a much quieter place when the right people were editing the noise. Is chair. Think they'll listen? Sarah studied the star map, noting the positions of the quiet ships now visible on her tactical display. 18 small dots that represented more destructive potential than all the fleets in galactic space combined. "I think they're about to learn that there are fates worse than death," she said quietly, "and that humanity has spent a very long time becoming very good at implementing them." The message was sent, and the clock began counting down. Somewhere in distant space, the Galactic Council would soon face a choice that would define the future of their civilization: learn to coexist with humanity, or discover exactly why humans were called the Silent War gods. The galaxy held its breath and waited. Ans have decided that those ships and their crews chose to threaten their people, so now they have chosen to be somewhere else, somewhere very far away, where they can contemplate the consequences of their actions without endangering anyone. He looked directly at Chancellor Vexari, and his next words carried the weight of absolute truth. "The Silent War has begun, and pray to whatever gods you worship that the humans consider it finished quickly, because the alternative is learning just how creative they can be when they're truly angry.